I stared at the pregnancy test in my trembling hands, watching the plus sign appear like a death sentence. Behind me, I could hear my sister Emma's delighted laughter echoing from the living room, where she was showing off my engagement ring, the one she'd convinced my fiancé David to give her instead. "Congratulations, sis!" she had chirped just an hour ago, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I'm sure you'll find someone else eventually. David and I are just so much more compatible, you know?" But this time, I wasn't crying. This time, I knew exactly what was coming, because I had lived through this nightmare before. 3 months ago, I had died in a car accident on what should have been my wedding day. The day I discovered David's affair with Emma. The day our parents chose her side, calling me dramatic and jealous. The day I lost everything. But somehow, impossibly, I had woken up 6 months in the past, back in my childhood bedroom, with all my memories intact. This was my second chance, and I wasn't going to waste it being a victim. The first time around, I had fought for David desperately, begging him to choose me, threatening to expose Emma's manipulations. It had only made me look pathetic. This time, I had done something much smarter. I had let Emma have exactly what she wanted. I had stepped back with grace, even helped plan their romantic getaways, even suggested the perfect hotel for their weekend trips. Poor Emma thought she had finally won our lifelong competition. She had no idea that the perfect hotel I'd recommended was the same one where David had been having his other affair, with Marcus, the charming bartender who worked the night shift. Emma didn't know that David was bisexual. She didn't know about his reckless behavior, his complete disregard for protection, his habit of collecting partners like trophies. She especially didn't know that Marcus had a rather serious case of chlamydia that he'd been too embarrassed to treat properly. I walked calmly to my laptop and opened the email I'd been waiting for. David's STD test results, sent to his email account that I'd been monitoring since I installed that keylogger 3 months ago when I borrowed his laptop to help with his resume. The password was still Emma123. He wasn't very creative. Positive for chlamydia and gonorrhea. Perfect! My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Can you pick up David's prescription from CVS? He's feeling too sick. The doctor said it's just stress from work." I smiled, remembering how this had played out the first time. Emma had gotten infected but had been too ashamed to tell anyone. She'd suffered in silence for weeks, the infection spreading, causing permanent damage that left her unable to have children, something she'd discovered only after she'd married David and they'd tried to start a family. But this time would be different. This time, I had made sure there would be witnesses. I had spent the last 3 months carefully rebuilding my relationship with our estranged grandmother, Patricia Morrison, the oil heiress our parents had disowned for not leaving her fortune to them. The first time around, I'd never known she existed. This time, I'd tracked her down and discovered that she'd been trying to contact me for years, only to have her letters intercepted by our mother. Grandmother Patricia had been horrified by the stories of how I'd been treated. She'd immediately hired private investigators to document everything. Emma's credit card fraud using my identity, our parents' embezzlement from the college fund our grandfather had left specifically for me, David's pattern of financial abuse. But more importantly, she'd helped me orchestrate today's grand finale. I checked my watch. In exactly 30 minutes, our entire extended family would be gathering for Sunday dinner at our parents' house, the dinner Emma had specifically requested so she could announce her engagement to David and show off her ring, the ring that had been purchased with money stolen from my inheritance. I drove to CVS and picked up David's prescription, antibiotics for his sexually transmitted infections. Then I made one small stop at the print shop to collect the documents I'd had prepared. I arrived at my parents' house just as everyone was sitting down to dinner. Emma was glowing, holding court at the head of the table, the stolen ring sparkling on her finger. David sat beside her, looking pale and sweating slightly. "Oh, good, you're here," Emma announced. "We have the most wonderful news to share." I smiled and took my seat, placing the CVS bag and a manila envelope beside my plate. "I'm so excited to hear it." Emma launched into her rehearsed speech about how she and David had fallen in love, how it had been so hard to tell me, how they hoped I could be happy for them. Our parents nodded along supportively. Our aunts and uncles murmured approval. "And look at this gorgeous ring," Emma thrust her hand out for everyone to admire. David has such exquisite taste. He certainly does, I agreed, pulling out my phone. Speaking of exquisite taste, David, you left this at my apartment last week. I slid the CVS bag across the table to him. Antibiotics for chlamydia and gonorrhea. The pharmacist said you should start taking them immediately. The table went dead silent. David's face went white as he stared at the prescription bottle. Emma's mouth fell open, her hand with the ring frozen in midair. I'm sorry, what? Our mother stammered. I opened the manila envelope and began spreading documents across the table. Well, since we're sharing news, I thought I should share some of my own. These are STD test results showing that David has been quite busy. Emma, honey, you might want to get tested too. Emma's face was cycling through every color in the spectrum. This has to be some kind of mistake. Oh, it gets better, I continued cheerfully, pulling out more papers. These are bank statements showing that the ring David gave you was purchased using money he stole from the joint account he opened in my name without my permission. And these, I spread out a series of photographs, are pictures of David with his other girlfriend Jessica and his boyfriend Marcus. The room erupted in chaos. Our aunt gasped audibly. Uncle Robert choked on his wine. Our father stood up so quickly he knocked over his chair. And Emma, I said, my voice cutting through the noise, these are copies of all the credit cards you opened in my name, the student loans you took out using my social security number, and the charges you've been making for the past 2 years. The FBI is very interested in identity theft cases these days. Emma was hyperventilating now, her face a splotchy red. You can't, this isn't, David, tell them this is all lies. David, however, was too busy vomiting into his napkin to respond. I stood up, pulling out one final document. And this is a restraining order that was served this morning, preventing any of you from contacting me or coming near my new apartment. The one that grandmother Patricia helped me purchase with my real inheritance. The one you've been stealing from for years. Our mother found her voice first. Your grandmother? Patricia is dead. Actually, she's not. She's been trying to contact me for years, but you've been intercepting her letters. She's also been funding a very thorough investigation into this family's finances. Turns out, embezzling from a trust fund is a federal crime. I pulled out my phone and called a number I had memorized. Hello, Detective Morrison? Yes, they're all here. You can come in now. The front door opened and 3 FBI agents walked in, led by Detective Morrison, grandmother Patricia's husband's nephew, who had been very interested in our case. Emma Morrison, David Chen, Margaret, and Robert Morrison, Detective Morrison announced. You're under arrest for identity theft, embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy. The next few minutes were beautiful chaos. Emma was sobbing hysterically as they put handcuffs on her. David was still dry heaving. Our parents were shouting about lawyers and rights and how this was all a misunderstanding. But the most beautiful moment came when Emma turned to me, mascara streaming down her face, and screamed, "How could you do this to your own sister?" I looked her straight in the eye and smiled. The same way you did it to me, except I did it better. As they led her away, I heard her shrieking about the STDs, about how she might never be able to have children, about how her life was ruined. The same words I had screamed the first time around when I was the one being destroyed. The restraining order was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, the full scope of my revenge unfolded like a perfectly choreographed symphony. Emma was charged with 15 counts of identity theft and fraud. The credit cards, the student loans, the forged documents, everything was laid out in excruciating detail. Her bail was set at $200,000, money that our parents couldn't access because their accounts had been frozen as part of the federal investigation. David was facing his own legal troubles. The joint account he'd opened in my name constituted bank fraud, and his pattern of financial abuse toward multiple women had caught the attention of prosecutors who were building a RICO case. But more immediately, he was dealing with the health consequences of his reckless behavior. The chlamydia and gonorrhea were just the beginning. Further testing revealed that he'd also contracted syphilis and herpes. His immune system, already compromised by stress and poor lifestyle choices, was struggling to fight off the multiple infections. The antibiotics made him violently ill, and he'd lost 20 pounds in 2 weeks. But the real masterpiece was what happened to my parents. The federal investigation revealed that they'd been systematically stealing from my trust fund for over a decade. Money that my grandfather had specifically left for my education and future, nearly $500,000, had been funneled into their business ventures, Emma's shopping sprees, and their lavish lifestyle. They'd forged my signature on documents, created fake educational expenses to justify withdrawals, and had even taken out loans against the trust fund to finance their vacation home. When the FBI seized their assets, they discovered something even better. Our parents had been running a small-scale Ponzi scheme through their financial consulting business, using my trust fund money to pay returns to early investors while recruiting new clients from their church and social circles. Grandmother Patricia had helped me understand the full extent of their crimes. She'd also helped me prepare for the legal battles that would follow. She hired the best lawyers in the state and made sure that every penny stolen from me would be recovered with interest. But the social destruction was just as satisfying as the legal consequences. The story of David's STDs and Emma's fraud spread through our social circle like wildfire. Emma's sorority sisters disowned her. David's business contacts dropped him. Our parents' church expelled them, and their neighbors began crossing the street to avoid them. Emma's dream wedding venue called to cancel her booking when the news broke. Her wedding dress designer refused to work with someone facing federal charges. Even the florist withdrew from the contract. Within a month, Emma had lost her job, her friends, her fiancé, and her freedom. She was facing 20 years in federal prison, and her lawyer had advised her to take a plea deal that would still mean at least 5 years behind bars. The STD situation had developed complications too. The infections had spread to her reproductive system, causing pelvic inflammatory disease. The doctor said there was a high chance she'd never be able to conceive naturally, the very future she'd been so desperate to steal from me. David fared even worse. His other partners had begun coming forward with their own stories of abuse and deception. Jessica, the girlfriend he'd been cheating with, filed a lawsuit for intentional infliction of emotional distress and transmission of disease. Marcus, the bartender, testified in exchange for immunity, revealing that David had been deliberately spreading infections because he thought it was funny. But the final stroke of poetic justice came from an unexpected source. 3 months after the arrests, I received a call from Detective Morrison. "I thought you'd want to know," he said. "Emma tried to claim that she was the real victim in all this. She told the prosecutor that you'd somehow orchestrated everything, that you deliberately let her get infected." I felt a chill of fear. Did they believe her? Well, that's the interesting part. We pulled David's full medical records as part of the investigation. Turns out he's been getting treated for STDs for almost 2 years. The timeline proves that he was already infected long before you stepped back from the relationship. Emma's lawyer tried to argue that you had some kind of duty to warn her, but the prosecutor pointed out that you had no way of knowing about David's medical condition. And then Emma made a critical mistake. She told them that you'd recommended the hotel where she and David had their romantic getaway, the hotel where David met Marcus. She meant it as evidence that you'd set her up. But we checked the hotel records. You stayed there yourself 8 months ago, well before you and David were having problems. You left a 5-star review specifically praising Marcus's bartending skills. From the outside, it looks like you just recommended a place you genuinely enjoyed. I smiled, remembering that night 8 months ago, the night I'd traveled back in time to, when I'd met Marcus and learned about David's secret life. The night I'd planted the seeds for this entire revenge plot. So she actually helped prove my innocence? More than that, her story made it clear that she knew you were in a relationship with David when she decided to pursue him. The prosecutor is now considering adding alienation of affection charges to her list of crimes. 6 months after my rebirth, I stood in the garden of grandmother Patricia's estate, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The legal proceedings were mostly over. Emma had been sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. David was facing 12 years for his various crimes. Our parents had received 15 years each and would likely never see freedom again. All of my money had been recovered, with significant penalties and interest. Grandmother Patricia had also formally adopted me as her heir, meaning I would inherit not just her love and support, but also her considerable fortune. But more than the money, more than the justice, I had gained something I'd never had before, a family that truly loved me. Grandmother Patricia had welcomed me into her world with open arms. She'd introduced me to distant relatives I'd never known existed, cousins and aunts and uncles who'd been kept away by my parents' lies. She'd helped me apply to graduate school and had connected me with opportunities I'd never dreamed possible. I'd also met someone new. Dr. James Morrison, Patricia's nephew, was a pediatric surgeon with kind eyes and gentle hands. Unlike David, he was honest about his past, his feelings, his intentions. Unlike David, he actually listened when I spoke and cared about my dreams and fears. "Penny for your thoughts?" James asked, stepping onto the terrace beside me. I leaned against his shoulder, feeling truly safe for the first time in either of my lives. Just thinking about how different everything is now. Better different. Infinitely better, I smiled, thinking about the letter I'd received from Emma last week. A rambling, desperate plea for forgiveness that revealed just how completely her world had collapsed. She'd written about the other inmates who bullied her, about the medical problems that were getting worse, about how she'd never imagined that her harmless competition with me would lead to this. But mostly, she'd written about the regret. The crushing, inescapable regret that consumed her every waking moment. "I never meant for it to go this far," she'd written. "I just wanted what you had. I didn't know it would destroy everything." I had read the letter once and then burned it. Some bridges, once burned, should stay that way. "Any word from the prosecutor about the final restitution hearing?" James asked. "Next week. Patricia says it's just a formality at this point. The judge is expected to order them to pay damages for emotional distress and punitive damages for the fraud. Could be another few $100,000. "And what will you do with all that money?" I thought about it for a moment. The first time around, I dreamed of a simple life. A small house, a loving husband, maybe kids someday. Those dreams had seemed so modest, so achievable, until they'd been ripped away from me. Now I had the resources to dream bigger. "I think I want to start a foundation," I said slowly, "for young women who've been victims of family financial abuse. Help them get legal representation, rebuild their credit, start over." James smiled and kissed the top of my head. "That sounds perfect." As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at it and laughed. "What is it?" "Update from my lawyer. Apparently Emma tried to appeal her sentence again. Claims she was coerced into the identity theft by David. And the appeals court rejected it unanimously. Said her attempts to blame others for her choices were transparent and insulting to the court." I deleted the message and slipped my phone back into my pocket. In the distance, I could see the lights of the city beginning to twinkle as darkness fell. Somewhere out there, Emma was sitting in a prison cell, counting down the days until she might see freedom again. David was in a different prison, dealing with both his legal consequences and his ongoing health problems. Our parents were in yet another facility, probably still maintaining their innocence and plotting their next appeal. But here, in this moment, surrounded by people who actually loved me, I felt something I'd never experienced before. Complete and total victory. Not just over my family's cruelty, not just over their crimes, but over the victim I used to be. The scared, desperate girl who had begged for love and acceptance from people who would never give it. That girl had died in a car crash 6 months ago. The woman who had been reborn in her place was stronger, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous to those who would try to harm her. I raised my wine glass to the sunset, toasting my old life and my new one. "To second chances," I whispered. And as the last light faded from the sky, I smiled, knowing that this time, I had won everything. The epilogue to my story came exactly 2 years after my rebirth in the form of a wedding invitation, not to attend, but to mock. David apparently had been released early for good behavior and had immediately returned to his old patterns. He'd gotten engaged to his prison pen pal, a woman named Tracy, who had somehow missed all the news coverage about his crimes. The invitation was forwarded to me by Detective Morrison, who thought I'd find it amusing. According to his sources, David had lied extensively about his past, claiming he'd been wrongfully imprisoned due to Emma's false accusations. Poor Tracy had no idea what she was walking into. I briefly considered warning her, the way I'd wished someone had warned me, but then I remembered the police reports about David's other victims, the women whose lives he'd destroyed without a moment's remorse. Some people had to learn their lessons the hard way. Instead, I sent a wedding gift, a beautifully wrapped package containing David's complete legal records, medical history, and a note that simply said, "Congratulations on your upcoming nuptials. I thought you should know what kind of man you're marrying." Tracy called off the wedding 3 days later. Emma, meanwhile, had been denied parole and was looking at serving her full sentence. Her cellmate had written to several news outlets, sharing stories about Emma's constant complaints and her inability to accept responsibility for her actions. According to the letters, Emma spent most of her time plotting ways to blame me for her situation and making elaborate plans for revenge when she got out. She'd apparently convinced herself that I had somehow orchestrated David's infidelity and STDs, despite the mountain of evidence proving otherwise. Her delusions were almost pitiful, almost. Our parents had suffered a different kind of breakdown. The stress of imprisonment had revealed underlying health problems that prison medical care was poorly equipped to handle. Our father had had a minor stroke, leaving him partially paralyzed. Our mother had developed severe depression and was on psychiatric medication. They'd each written me letters over the years, sometimes begging for forgiveness, sometimes hurling accusations, sometimes offering deals and promises they had no power to keep. I read them all and threw them all away. Because the most important lesson I'd learned from my rebirth wasn't about revenge or justice or even karma. It was about the power of choosing who deserved a place in your life. The girl I'd been before had been so desperate for family love that she'd accepted scraps and called them feasts. She'd mistaken abuse for affection and manipulation for care. The woman I'd become understood that family wasn't about blood or obligation. It was about choice, respect, and genuine love. My real family was sitting around Patricia's dinner table every Sunday. James and his children from his first marriage, Patricia's extended relatives who'd embraced me completely, and the close friends who'd become siblings of choice. We were planning our own wedding now, James and I, and it would be everything my first engagement had never been. Honest, joyful, and surrounded by people who actually wanted to celebrate our happiness instead of competing for it. On the morning of our wedding, exactly 3 years after my rebirth, I woke up in Patricia's guest room and found an envelope that had been slipped under my door. For a moment, my heart clenched with old fear. Had one of them somehow gotten out? Had they found a way to reach me? But the handwriting on the envelope was Patricia's elegant script. Inside was a single photograph, me at age 5, sitting on my grandfather's lap, both of us laughing at something off camera. On the back, in my grandfather's handwriting, were the words, "My brave little girl." Below that, Patricia had written a note. "He always knew you were special. He would be so proud of the woman you've become. Not because of what you survived, but because of how you chose to rebuild. Love, always, grandmother." I clutched the photograph to my chest and cried, not tears of sadness or anger, but tears of pure joy. 3 hours later, I walked down the aisle toward James, toward my future, toward the life I'd fought so hard to claim. The church was filled with people who loved me genuinely and unconditionally. And as I said my vows, promising to love and cherish and protect this man who'd already proven himself worthy of such promises, I felt something I'd never experienced before: complete peace. The scared, desperate girl who'd begged for crumbs of affection was gone forever. In her place stood a woman who knew her worth, who'd learned to demand the love she deserved, and who'd discovered that the best revenge against those who'd tried to destroy her was simply to be gloriously, triumphantly happy. As James kissed me and the congregation erupted in applause, I sent one final thought to Emma, David, and my parents, wherever they were. Thank you for teaching me what I was worth by showing me what I was not, and thank you for giving me the strength to become everything you never believed I could be. The story ends there with the protagonist transformed, victorious, and free. But sometimes, late at night, when James is sleeping beside me and our children are safe in their beds, I remember the moment in that car when everything went dark. I remember the impossible second chance I was given, and I whisper a prayer of gratitude to whatever force in the universe decided I deserved better. Because in the end, that's what this story is really about. Not revenge, but redemption. Not destruction, but the decision to build something beautiful from the ashes of betrayal. I chose to rise. I chose to fight. I chose to win. And I chose to be happy. That choice, more than any revenge plot or legal victory, was the real triumph of my second life. The ceremony would be held in Patricia's garden, with flowers from her greenhouse and music played by James's musician friends. The reception would be catered by a local farm-to-table restaurant, and our guest list included only people who had proven their loyalty and love through actions, not just words. On the morning of our wedding, exactly 3 years after my rebirth, I woke up in Patricia's guest room, the same room I'd stayed in during those first terrifying weeks when I'd been planning my revenge and rebuilding my life from scratch. I found an envelope that had been slipped under my door sometime during the night. For a moment, my heart clenched with old fear. Had one of them somehow gotten out of prison? Had they found a way to reach me even here? But the handwriting on the cream-colored envelope was Patricia's elegant script, and I relaxed immediately. Inside was a single black and white photograph. Me at age 5, sitting on my grandfather's lap in this very garden. Both of us laughing at something off camera. I was wearing a white dress with tiny flowers embroidered on it, and my grandfather's eyes were crinkled with joy as he looked down at me. On the back, in my grandfather's careful handwriting, were the words, "My brave little girl, may you always know how loved you are." Below that, Patricia had added a note in her own hand. "He always knew you were special, darling. He would be so proud of the woman you've become. Not because of what you survived, but because of how you chose to rebuild. He always said that true strength isn't about never falling down. It's about getting back up and choosing to be better than those who hurt you. Today you marry a man who sees your worth the way your grandfather and I always have. Love always, grandmother." I clutched the photograph to my chest and cried. Not tears of sadness or anger, but tears of pure joy and gratitude for the family I'd gained and the life I'd built from the ashes of betrayal. 3 hours later, I walked down a petal-strewn path through Patricia's rose garden toward James, toward my future, toward the life I'd fought so hard to claim. The small chapel Patricia had built on the estate was filled with people who loved me genuinely and unconditionally, something I'd never experienced in my first life. James's daughters, Sarah and Emma, a coincidence that had initially unsettled me but which I'd learned to see as healing, served as my flower girls. They'd embraced me immediately when James and I started dating, and they'd been part of my recovery process in ways I hadn't expected. Loving them had taught me what healthy family relationships looked like. Patricia walked me down the aisle, her arms steady and strong despite her 82 years. She'd insisted on this honor, saying that she'd missed too many important moments in my life already and wasn't about to miss this one. As we reached the altar, I looked into James's eyes and saw everything I'd never had with David. Genuine love, respect, honesty, and a future built on trust rather than lies. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, and I felt a sense of peace settle over me like a warm blanket. During the ceremony, as James and I exchanged vows we'd written ourselves, I found myself thinking about Emma, David, and my parents. Not with anger or hatred, but with something approaching pity. They were still trapped in their patterns of selfishness, manipulation, and blame. Even now, sitting in their prison cells, they were probably plotting ways to avoid responsibility for their actions and find someone else to blame for their suffering. But I was free. Free from their toxicity, free from the need for their approval, free from the belief that I somehow deserved their treatment. "I promise to love you not despite your past, but because of how beautifully you've grown from it," James said during his vows, his voice strong and clear. "I promise to build a life with you based on truth, respect, and genuine partnership." When I spoke my own vows, I promised to choose love over fear, truth over convenience, and growth over comfort. I promised to be the partner he deserved and to never settle for less than I was worth. As James kissed me and our small congregation erupted in applause, I sent one final thought to Emma, David, and my parents, wherever they were. Thank you for teaching me what I was worth by showing me what I was not. Thank you for giving me the strength to become everything you never believed I could be. And thank you for setting me free to find the love I actually deserved. The reception was everything I dreamed of, intimate, joyful, and filled with genuine celebration. Patricia gave a toast that reduced everyone to tears, talking about second chances and the courage it takes to rebuild after betrayal. James's best man, his brother, Detective Morrison, toasted to justice being served and new beginnings being embraced. But the moment that meant the most to me came when James's daughters presented me with a gift they'd made themselves. A photo album titled Our New Family, filled with pictures from the past year. Holidays at Patricia's house, beach vacations, quiet Sunday mornings, everyday moments that proved what real love looked like. "We're so glad Daddy found you," Sarah said, throwing her arms around me. "You make him happy, and you make us feel safe." That night, as James and I danced to our wedding song in Patricia's ballroom, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The first time around, I'd been so focused on trying to fix my broken family that I'd never noticed how toxic they were. I'd been so desperate for their love that I'd accepted crumbs and called them feasts. This time, I'd learned to recognize real love when I saw it. I'd learned to value myself enough to demand better. I'd learned that sometimes the best revenge is simply living well and surrounding yourself with people who appreciate your worth. "What are you thinking about?" James asked as we swayed together. "Just how grateful I am," I said, "for this moment, for you, for the chance to start over." "Any regrets?" I considered the question seriously. Did I regret the pain I'd caused my family? Did I regret destroying their lives the way they'd destroyed mine? "No," I said finally. "They made their choices, and they have to live with the consequences. I'm not responsible for protecting them from the results of their own actions." "And Emma? Do you ever wonder what might have happened if you'd tried to save her instead of exposing her?" I thought about my sister sitting in her prison cell, probably still convinced that she was the victim in our story. Emma had the same chances I did to choose differently. She could have been honest about her feelings instead of manipulative. She could have built her own life instead of trying to steal mine. She could have faced consequences and learned from them instead of always looking for someone else to blame. But she never wanted to be better. She just wanted to win. And people who only care about winning, no matter the cost, eventually lose everything that actually matters. James spun me gently and I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in years. Around us, our chosen family celebrated our happiness with genuine joy. No hidden agendas or secret resentments. The story ends there with me transformed, victorious, and genuinely happy. But sometimes, late at night, when James and the girls are sleeping peacefully, I remember that moment in the car when everything went dark. I remember the impossible second chance I was given, and I whisper a prayer of gratitude to whatever force in the universe decided I deserved better. Because in the end, that's what this story is really about. Not revenge, but redemption. Not destruction, but the decision to build something beautiful from the ashes of betrayal. Not punishment, but the choice to break free from toxic patterns and create a life worth living. I chose to rise, I chose to fight, I chose to win, but most importantly, I chose to be happy. That choice, more than any revenge plot or legal victory, was the real triumph of my second life. I'd learned that the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's building a life so beautiful and fulfilling that their absence becomes a blessing rather than a loss. And as I fell asleep in my husband's arms on our wedding night, surrounded by love and possibility, I knew that I had finally, truly won.